a driver who takes a wrong turn, an assassin waiting at the wrong place, an archduke who should have just gone home. These three impossible coincidences triggered a war that would kill 20 million people and destroy 4 empires in just 4 years. In this video, you'll discover how the most accidental assassination in history unleashed the most devastating conflict the world had ever seen up to that point. The world of 1914 represented the peak of modern civilization. Technology was advancing at breakneck speed. Culture was flourishing in Europe's grand capitals, and fashion reflected a prosperous, confident society. Cities lit up with electricity, automobiles were starting to replace horses, and telephones connected people separated by entire continents. Everything pointed to humanity having reached an unprecedented level of progress. But beneath this shiny surface, the European continent was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The great empires watched each other with a mix of admiration and suspicion. Each had its own territorial ambitions, and each firmly believed their moment of glory had arrived. France hadn't forgotten the humiliation of 1870, when Prussia ripped away Alsace and Lorraine. Those lost provinces were an open wound on French national pride, and the political elite dreamed of the day they could take them back. Meanwhile, Germany, unified and powerful, looked at the map of Europe with hungry eyes. Kaiser Wilhelm II wasn't content with what he already possessed. He wanted more territories, more influence, more prestige. And to back up those ambitions, Germany was building an impressive navy. This new German fleet made the British extremely nervous. For centuries, Great Britain had dominated the seas without any rival. Their naval power was the guarantee of their global empire and national security. Watching Germany build cutting-edge warships represented a direct threat to that supremacy. British admirals watched with alarm as each new German battleship rolled out of the shipyards. But the tensions weren't limited to just these three powers. The Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires faced their own internal crises. Both were ancient political structures governing dozens of different ethnic groups, and many of these groups no longer wanted to be part of these multi-ethnic empires. Serbs, Bosnians, Czechs, Croats, and many other peoples were starting to talk about independence and national self-determination. Russia played a particularly interesting role in this geopolitical chessboard. Tsar Nicholas II presented himself as the protector of all Slavic peoples, especially those living under Austro-Hungarian rule. This stance made Russia a natural supporter of any nationalist movement in the Balkans, Europe's most volatile region. Secret alliances made the situation even more complicated. France and Russia had signed a mutual aid pact. Germany and Austria-Hungary had committed to backing each other. Britain maintained an understanding with France, though not as formal as a complete alliance. These connections meant that any regional conflict could rapidly expand across the entire continent. And if that wasn't enough, military technology had advanced dramatically since the last major European war. Machine guns could fire hundreds of bullets per minute. Artillery could launch projectiles at distances unimaginable just decades earlier. Railroads allowed entire armies to be mobilized in a matter of days. All these advances meant the next war would be different from anything before. The generals of each nation studied these new weapons with fascination. Many of them believed these modern arms would make war shorter and more decisive. They imagined quick battles where superior technology would guarantee a clean victory. This confidence in technological supremacy made them eager to demonstrate the might of their respective armies. Everyone was talking about everyone else behind their backs. Diplomats exchanged rumors at elegant dinners. Spies reported suspicious military movements. Newspapers published inflammatory articles about foreign threats. The atmosphere in Europe was one of tense anticipation. Everyone knew something big was about to happen. But no one could imagine that the trigger would come from a series of errors so absurd they'd seem impossible if they weren't documented. In a specific region of Austria-Hungary lived communities of Serbs and Bosnians who deeply hated being under Austro-Hungarian rule. These territories had been recently annexed by the empire, and the local population had never really accepted this foreign control.
Resentment grew day by day, fueled by stories of discrimination and the desire to unite with Serbia, their sister nation to the south. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, decided to visit Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, in June 1914. This visit was tremendously provocative. Franz Ferdinand represented exactly what these nationalists hated, the imperial power that oppressed them. Even worse, he'd chosen to visit on a date symbolically offensive to Serbs, the anniversary of a historic battle that meant a lot to their national identity. The Archduke's visit wasn't secret. In fact, it was exactly the opposite. The Austro-Hungarian authorities published the complete route of his tour in local newspapers days in advance. Anyone who wanted to know where the Archduke's vehicle would pass could simply buy the newspaper and study the entire itinerary. And to make things even easier for any potential attacker, Franz Ferdinand would travel in a convertible car, completely exposed to everyone's view. A group of young Serbian nationalists, backed by a secret organization called the Black Hand, saw this opportunity as a gift from destiny. These conspirators, most barely over 20 years old, armed themselves with bombs and pistols. Then they strategically distributed themselves along the published route, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The day of the attempt started exactly how you'd expect it to end. Badly. The Archduke's convoy moved slowly through Sarajevo's streets, waving to the crowds. Then, one of the assassins threw a bomb directly at the Archduke's vehicle. But the driver saw the projectile in time and accelerated sharply. The bomb bounced off the back of the car and exploded under the vehicle behind it, seriously injuring several officers. Franz Ferdinand was saved by inches. The logical decision, the obvious decision, the only reasonable decision at that moment was cancel the rest of the visit, seek immediate shelter, and get out of Sarajevo as fast as possible. The attempt had failed, but clearly there were people who wanted him dead. Staying was absolute madness. But Franz Ferdinand didn't make the logical decision. Instead of seeking safety, the Archduke insisted on continuing with his schedule. He wanted to visit the wounded officers at the hospital. It was a noble gesture, certainly, but also extraordinarily reckless. Once again, he'd get into the same convertible and drive through the streets of a city where they'd just tried to assassinate him minutes before. The vehicle's driver, understandably nervous after the attack, received hurried instructions about a new route to the hospital, but in the midst of chaos and confusion, no one made sure the driver fully understood the instructions. And this is where the story takes a turn that seems straight out of a fiction novel. The driver, following what he believed was the correct route, turned down the wrong street. The accompanying officers realized the mistake immediately and started shouting contradictory instructions. The driver, confused, stopped the vehicle completely to clarify where he should go. And here happens the most improbable coincidence in modern history. The car stopped exactly in front of a cafe, and sitting in that cafe, resigned because the attempt had failed, was Gavrilo Princip, one of the assassins who'd participated in the plot. Princip had assumed the mission was a total failure and was having coffee, processing the disappointment. Then, completely unexpectedly, the target of his assassination appeared right in front of him, motionless, completely exposed. Princip couldn't believe his luck. He stood up, pulled out his pistol, and fired twice. One bullet hit Franz Ferdinand in the neck. The other fatally wounded his wife, Sophie. The Archduke died minutes later, his last words begging them to take care of Sophie. This 30-second navigation error had just changed the course of world history. But the worst was yet to come. Hit subscribe if you want to understand how a simple wrong turn could trigger a global war, because what comes next reveals the most devastating chain reaction in modern history.
Austria-Hungary received news of the assassination with understandable fury, but also with cold political calculation. The empire's leaders knew exactly who to blame: Serbia.
Although they didn't have conclusive proof that the Serbian government had directly ordered the assassination, there were clear connections between the assassins and Serbian nationalist organizations. And more importantly, Austria-Hungary had been looking for an excuse to crush Serbia, that small but annoying neighbor that continuously supported separatist movements within the empire. But Austria-Hungary wasn't strong enough to act alone. Austro-Hungarian leaders needed backing, especially since they knew Russia protected Serbia. So they turned to their most powerful ally, Germany. Kaiser Wilhelm II, upon hearing the Austro-Hungarian proposal to declare war on Serbia, responded with enthusiasm. Germany didn't just support the action, it practically demanded it. The Germans gave Austria-Hungary what would become known as a blank check, carte blanche to do whatever they wanted with Serbia, with the guarantee of complete German military support. Armed with this backing, the Austro-Hungarians crafted a list of deliberately impossible demands and sent them to Serbia. These demands included allowing Austro-Hungarian officials to investigate inside Serbian territory, suppressing all anti-Austro-Hungarian propaganda, and basically handing over national sovereignty to Vienna. Austria-Hungary wasn't looking for a diplomatic solution, they were looking for a war, and these demands guaranteed Serbia would reject them. Surprisingly, Serbia accepted almost all the demands. Almost. Serbia rejected only a couple of the most humiliating points that would have meant completely giving up their independence. To a neutral observer, the Serbian response seemed incredibly conciliatory. But for Austria-Hungary, any partial rejection was enough. On July 28, 1914, exactly 1 month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. And then the alliances started activating like a perfectly oiled machine of destruction. Russia, faithful to its promise to protect Slavic peoples, mobilized its massive armies in Serbia's defense. Germany, seeing Russian mobilization as a direct threat, declared war on Russia on August 1st. 2 days later, on August 3rd, Germany also declared war on France, Russia's ally. Montenegro, a small kingdom allied with Serbia, also joined the conflict. In a matter of days, what had started as a regional incident in the Balkans had transformed into a continental war. But Germany had an ace up its sleeve. German military strategists had spent years perfecting a plan for this exact situation. The Schlieffen Plan, named after the general who designed it, was brilliant in its simplicity and audacity. The Germans perfectly understood the problem they faced, a two-front war, Russia to the east with its millions of soldiers, and France to the west with its formidable defenses. Fighting simultaneously against both powers would be suicide. So what was the solution? Absolute speed. The plan worked like this. Russia was a clumsy giant. Its territory was so vast and its railroad infrastructure so limited that fully mobilizing its armies would take weeks, possibly months. Germany would exploit this Russian slowness in the most aggressive way possible. While Russia prepared, Germany would launch the totality of its military might against France in a demolishing blow designed to knock out the French in 6 weeks. Once France fell, Germany would move all those victorious armies eastward to face Russia, which by then would barely have completed its mobilization. 2 formidable enemies would be defeated one by one, exploiting the advantage of speed against slowness. The plan had impeccable logic. It was the kind of strategy that made German generals feel like military geniuses. There was just one small technical problem. France had built a massive line of fortifications along its entire border with Germany. These defenses would turn any frontal attack into a bloodbath that would consume exactly the time Germany couldn't afford to lose. The German solution? Don't attack the fortified border at all. Instead, Germany would send 750,000 soldiers completely bypassing the French defenses. How? By marching through Belgium. But there was a problem the German planners had completely underestimated, and that mistake would change the entire balance of power in Europe. Subscribe if these military calculations are fascinating you, because the German Empire's most catastrophic decision is about to be revealed. Belgium was a neutral country. Its neutrality was guaranteed by international treaties that all the great powers, including Germany, had signed. Germany expected Belgium to simply step aside and allow 750,000 German soldiers to march through their territory as if they were strolling through a public park. The Germans even presented this request politely, assuring Belgium they had no hostile intentions against the country and simply needed to use their roads temporarily. From the German perspective, it was a reasonable request. Just let us invade France through your country and nobody gets hurt. Belgium flatly refused. King Albert I and his government decided that defending their neutrality was worth any price. This decision completely surprised the Germans, who'd assumed such a small country would never dare challenge Europe's most powerful military machine. But Belgium didn't just refuse, they fought. And they fought well. The Belgian army, though vastly outnumbered, used their knowledge of local terrain to dramatically slow the German advance. They destroyed bridges, flooded fields, and fortified every town in the way. Every day Belgium resisted was a day Germany couldn't afford to lose according to their master plan. The Germans, frustrated by this unexpected resistance, responded with a brutality that would haunt them for the rest of the war. German troops committed atrocities against Belgian civilians. Entire cities were burned in retaliation for acts of resistance. Thousands of innocent civilians were executed. Allied propaganda would have abundant material to portray Germany as the monster of Europe. And if this wasn't damaging enough to the German image, their uniforms didn't help at all. German soldiers wore helmets with metal spikes on top. Some regiments even decorated their uniforms with skulls. If you were trying not to look like the villains of history, this was exactly the wrong style. The violation of Belgian neutrality had a consequence that would completely change the course of the war. Great Britain, which until that moment had been undecided about getting involved in a continental conflict, now had the perfect justification to enter the war. The British government had been divided. Many politicians and citizens saw no reason to fight in what seemed like yet another European dispute. But invading little neutral Belgium was different. This violated international treaties. This represented German aggression in its most brutal form. German newspapers published horrific stories about German atrocities in Belgium. British public opinion, which days earlier had been mostly pacifist, now demanded action. On August 4th, Britain declared war on Germany. The German plan, which depended on speed and a quick victory before the great powers could react, had just received a death blow. Now Germany didn't just face France and Russia, they also faced the British Empire, with its dominant navy and virtually unlimited global resources. But Germany, having come this far, couldn't stop now. German troops continued pushing through Belgium, leaving destruction in their wake. They finally broke Belgian resistance and entered France. At first, it seemed maybe the German plan could still work. German armies advanced deep into French territory. The French, with their bright blue uniforms and red pants, presented themselves as easy targets for German artillery. When French infantry columns marched through open countryside, German cannons tore them apart with terrifying efficiency. All the nations involved in this conflict had entered with an outdated military mentality. They imagined glorious battles where bravery and honor would triumph. The French, in particular, had developed a military doctrine called élan vital, which basically meant that enthusiasm and offensive spirit would conquer any obstacle. This philosophy turned out to be suicidal when faced with modern machine guns and long-range artillery. During these early weeks, all nations had to rapidly update their uniforms and tactics. The French abandoned their colorful uniforms for more discreet tones. The British learned that tight formations were an invitation to disaster. The Germans discovered that speed had its limits when your supply lines stretched too thin. On the Eastern Front, the news was better for Germany. Russia had mobilized its second army much faster than expected, but this turned out to be a strategic mistake. German General Paul von Hindenburg practically annihilated this Russian army at the Battle of Tannenberg, capturing or killing over 120,000 Russian soldiers. It was a devastating German victory. Austria-Hungary, however, was proving to be a disappointing ally. The Austro-Hungarian chief of staff was Konrad von Hetzendorf, an undeniably attractive man, but who turned out to be a mediocre military strategist at best. Konrad constantly ignored German advice, launched poorly planned offensives, and then came running to Germany every time his plans failed catastrophically. Most embarrassing for Austria-Hungary was that Serbia, that little country they were supposed to crush in weeks, was giving them a considerable beating. Serbian forces repeatedly repelled Austro-Hungarian invasions at the start of the war. This empire that had started the conflict to punish Serbia now couldn't even conquer it. Meanwhile, on the Western Front, the Germans continued their advance. They reached a point where they could see the towers of Paris on the horizon. Any reasonable observer would have thought Germany was about to achieve their quick victory after all. But then, everything started to fall apart. And just when it seemed Germany would win the war in weeks, a German coordination error opened a gap that would change everything. French Commander-in-Chief Joseph Joffre knew he had to do something drastic or France would fall. In an act of calculated desperation, he ordered his armies to stop retreating. French troops would turn around and fight where they stood, no matter the consequences. In the resulting battle, known as the First Battle of the Marne, something unexpected happened. A gap opened between two advancing German armies. This hole in the German lines was a golden opportunity for the Allies. If an enemy can infiltrate a gap, they can attack your forces from the sides and from behind, turning a defensive line into a death trap. German commanders, realizing the danger, had no choice but to order a tactical retreat. It was the first time in the entire campaign that the Germans fell back. The Allies, seeing this opportunity, launched a counterattack. The Germans responded by digging defensive positions to stabilize their lines. The French and British did the same. And then something peculiar began. Both sides started moving north, each trying to outflank the other. Every time one tried to flank, the other extended their lines to block the movement. This race to the sea continued until both armies literally reached the coast of the English Channel. Now there existed a continuous line of trenches stretching from the Belgian coast to the Swiss border, cutting across all of northern France. The German plan for a quick victory had died. The war that was supposed to be over by Christmas was just beginning. And the type of war that would emerge would be more horrible than anything humanity had experienced before. Trench warfare on the Western Front worked in an appallingly simple way. Two parallel lines of trenches separated by devastated terrain called no man's land. This intermediate space sometimes measured only 100 meters, sometimes several kilometers, but it was always sown with barbed wire, shell craters, and the bodies of those fallen in previous attacks. A typical attack began with a massive artillery bombardment. The cannons would launch hundreds of thousands of projectiles at enemy trenches, sometimes for entire days without stopping. The goal was to destroy defenses and demoralize the defenders. But this bombardment also had a devastating psychological effect. Soldiers who survived days of constant shelling developed what was then called shell shock and what we'd now recognize as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Many were permanently traumatized, unable to function after hours of absolute terror while explosions shook the ground around them. After the bombardment came the infantry assault. The attacking soldiers had to leave their trenches and cross no man's land, while enemy machine guns fired thousands of bullets per minute at them. This crossing was a surreal nightmare. Men ran and stumbled through mud, jumping over craters filled with toxic water, getting tangled in barbed wire, while their comrades fell dead around them. Machine guns from the defensive trench massacred wave after wave of attackers. Generals sent more men, and then more, until finally the enemy trench was captured or the attack completely exhausted itself. Months of fighting and thousands of deaths could result in advances of only a few meters or kilometers. Living in the trenches was its own special hell. Corpses piled up because it was too dangerous to recover them. The mud wasn't just mud, it was a sticky mixture that could swallow you whole if you got trapped in it. Puddles of stagnant water contained poisonous chemicals from exploded shells. Rats, fed by the corpses, grew to monstrous sizes. Diseases spread quickly in these unsanitary conditions, and the smell, a combination of decomposing bodies, excrement, chemicals, and rotten mud, was something survivors would describe as unforgettable for the rest of their lives. It's hard to comprehend how millions of soldiers endured these conditions for years. It's equally hard to understand how commanders could order this continuous suffering day after day, month after month. But that's how World War I worked on the Western Front. A deadly stalemate where both sides threw their young men to die in attacks that rarely achieved anything significant. The accidental assassination of an archduke had unleashed this horror. A driver who turned down the wrong street had initiated a chain of events that would kill 20 million people and leave another 20 million wounded. The war everyone expected to end quickly lasted a full 4 years and changed the map of Europe forever.
Subscribe if this video changed your perspective on how seemingly small events can trigger global catastrophes. Because every week we analyze the historical moments that transformed our world in ways we never imagined.